You're coming with me." Millionaire CEO found a freezing nurse at the bus stop, then took her home, and never let her leave. The snow was falling harder than it had all winter, blanketing the streets of New York in thick, silent white. Midnight had long passed, and the city, usually never asleep, seemed to have finally dozed off under the weight of the storm. Streetlights cast a dim orange glow through the haze, and the wind howled between empty buildings. A sleek black Bentley moved slowly through the deserted street, its tires crunching softly against the snow. Inside, Alexander Reed sat with one hand resting on the leather steering wheel, the other adjusting the heat controls. The world outside was a blur of white, and he had no reason to be driving at this hour, except that he often couldn't sleep. As he turned onto Lexington Avenue, he spotted someone at the bus stop. He squinted, slowing the car until it came to a sharp halt. There, huddled on the cold metal bench, was a young woman in a nurse's uniform. Her blonde hair was damp with snow, her shoulders trembling under a too-thin coat. She sat stiffly, hands stuffed into her pockets, eyes unfocused. Her phone lay uselessly in her lap, screen black, battery dead. Alexander's brow furrowed. Without thinking, he threw the car into park and stepped out. The cold hit him instantly, biting through his coat, but he barely noticed. He approached her with quiet steps, the snow muffling the sound of his shoes. She did not look up until he spoke. "You're coming with me." Her head snapped toward him, eyes wide with alarm. "Excuse me? I don't even know you." He looked directly at her, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not leaving you here to freeze. That's not happening." She stood up quickly, instinctively putting a few feet between them. "I'm fine," she said, even though her voice shook and her teeth chattered. "I'm waiting for the next bus." "There is no next bus," he replied, glancing down the empty street. "Not tonight. Everything's shut down. No taxis, no trains, and you're wearing scrubs in a snowstorm." "I can figure it out," she insisted, wrapping her arms tightly around herself. He did not move closer, but there was something in his gaze that didn't let her look away. Not pity, not attraction. Something else, like unspoken recognition. He took off his long black coat and held it out toward her. "Put this on." She hesitated, then slowly reached out and slipped it over her shoulders. It was warm, smelled faintly of cedar and something expensive, and instantly dulled the sting of the cold. "I can take you home," he said simply. "Where do you live?" "Harlem," she replied cautiously. "Too far to walk." "And there's no way a cab's getting through this. My car is heated, and I am not a psychopath. You can sit in the back and I will take you wherever you need to go. Or you can stay out here and get hypothermia. Your choice." She studied him for a long second. He looked familiar, though she could not quite place why. His face had the kind of sharp classic structure you might see in magazines. Cold gray eyes, perfectly tailored suit beneath a dark cashmere scarf, hair just beginning to glint with snow. He looked like someone who had never stood at a freezing bus stop in his life. Against her better judgment, her body gave her the answer first. Her legs moved before her voice did. "Fine," she murmured, and he opened the passenger door. She slipped inside, unsure if this was a mistake, unsure of anything except the warmth that instantly wrapped around her. The door shut with a soft thud, muffling the wind. She watched as he walked around the car and got in beside her, then glanced once at her before pulling away from the curb. Neither of them spoke as the car moved down the snowy street, two strangers in a silent vehicle, bound by nothing but an unlikely moment and the mercy of a man who never stopped for anyone. Until tonight. The hume of the heater filled the silence between them as the Bentley glided through the snow-dusted streets. The windows slowly cleared from fog, revealing the glittering city blanketed in white. Inside the car, the warmth was almost shocking after the bitter cold outside. Lily sat rigid in the passenger seat, her hands still wrapped tightly around the coat he had given her. She pulled it closer, inhaling the unfamiliar but comforting scent embedded in the fabric. It smelled of money, yes, but also of something calm, composed, safe. She glanced sideways at the man driving. He had not said another word since she got in. He seemed entirely focused on the road, his profile sharp in the glow of the dashboard lights. Everything about him was meticulous, his posture, his watch, even the way he held the steering wheel. "Thank you," she said quietly, more out of habit than expectation. He did not look at her. "You do not have to thank me. You were freezing." She hesitated. Still, most people wouldn't have stopped. A faint smile pulled at the corner of his lips. "I am not most people." The response could have sounded arrogant, but it didn't. It was just a fact. They fell silent again, and Lily leaned back against the seat. The exhaustion hit her hard, now that she was finally warm. 14 hours straight on the hospital floor, short-staffed, no lunch break, and a patient coding during her last hour. She had not meant to miss the last bus, but things like that kept happening. Her life was a balancing act on the edge of collapse. Rent overdue, her second job cutting shifts, and her student loan collector calling like clockwork. He turned the car into an underground garage. Lily's eyes widened as they descended into a private entrance lined with polished concrete and soft lighting. This was not just any apartment building. "You live here?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "For now," he replied, putting the car in park. "Come on, you are staying here tonight." She blinked. "Wait, what?" "It is not a question," he said, already stepping out of the car. "You need a place to sleep. I have more than enough space." Her instincts flared. "I can't just stay at some stranger's place." He paused beside the open passenger door, meeting her eyes without force or plea. "No strings. I will take the guest room. Lock the door if you want. But you are not wandering out into that storm." She bit her lip, half of her brain telling her this was insane, the other half weighed down by fatigue in the memory of that frozen bench. After a moment, she got out of the car. Inside, the apartment was even more stunning than she expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows, warm lighting, a roaring fireplace, and silence so complete it felt sacred. The space was elegant but not cold, tasteful, masculine, not showy. "You can take the room on the left," he said, gesturing toward a hallway. "There are clean clothes in the dresser. They will be big on you, but warm." She turned to him slowly. "Why are you doing this?" He shrugged slightly. "Because I can, and because I have a conscience." That answer lingered with her as she walked to the guest room. The bed was made perfectly. The sheets smelled like lavender and something expensive. Everything was pristine, but it did not feel empty. It felt lived in, yet untouched, like someone who had everything and still felt nothing. 15 minutes later, wearing an oversized gray sweater and sweatpants that almost swallowed her, Lily stepped quietly back into the kitchen. She had meant to ask for water, but froze in the doorway. Alexander was standing at the stove, cooking, not a private chef, not takeout, just him in a white t-shirt and dark slacks, stirring something in a small pot. He glanced over and noticed her watching. "I figured you might be hungry." She blinked. "What are you making?" "Ramen," he said simply. "Nothing fancy, just warm." She stepped closer, surprised at how normal he looked now. Just a man, not a billionaire. Just someone who, for whatever reason, had seen her and fed her. As she sat at the counter, he set a bowl in front of her and handed her a pair of chopsticks. She stared at him, more confused than ever. "You're not what I expected." He looked at her, eyes unreadable. "Neither are you." The morning light spilled through the tall windows, casting soft gold across the guest room. Lily awoke to the scent of coffee drifting through the apartment and the strange comfort of sheets far softer than any she had ever owned. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then it all returned, the snow, the Bentley, the stranger who had made her ramen at 2 a.m. She found a note on the kitchen counter, written in precise, slanted handwriting. "There's cab money on the table. You can leave whenever you're ready, but if you want to talk again, call me." Beneath it, a crisp $100 bill and a business card. Alexander Reed, Reed Global Investments. She stared at the name for a long minute. It rang a faint bell. Magazine articles, finance blogs, some Forbes list she had skimmed at a grocery checkout. So, that's who he was. She took the money but left the card. 3 days passed. she did not call. But on the fourth evening, while working a volunteer shift at a community health fair organized by the hospital, she saw him again. He was standing in the back of the event hall, silent and still among the bustling crowd of nurses, patients, and donors. No fanfare, no entourage, just him, dressed in charcoal gray, hands in his coat pockets, eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. Lily was helping a frail, elderly man into a chair for his free checkup. He had no ID, no insurance, no family listed, just a worn-out coat and a gentle smile. She knelt beside him, speaking softly, taking his blood pressure with the tenderness of someone who believed every person deserved dignity, no matter their circumstances. From across the room, Alexander watched. He did not move, did not interrupt. But something in his expression shifted, something subtle but profound. When the line thinned and the crowd began to disperse, Lily turned and noticed him. She hesitated, then approached him. "You followed me here?" she asked, half teasing, half unsure. "No," he said. "I fund this program every year. I just did not expect to see you." She folded her arms. "Well, here I am." He looked around the hall. "You volunteer after 14-hour shifts?" She shrugged. "People need help. I know what it's like not to have any." He nodded, quiet for a moment, then said, "My mother was a nurse. She used to bring me to places like this when I was a kid. I hated it back then, but now, I think I understand." Lily tilted her head. "You never mentioned that." "There's a lot I do not mention," he replied, the edge of a smile touching his lips. They stood in silence for a beat, then he said, "Come with me, just for coffee, no pressure." She hesitated again, but this time she nodded. Coffee turned into a walk. The walk turned into sitting on a bench at the edge of Central Park, where the snow had melted just enough to expose the earth beneath. They did not talk about money or careers or anything impressive. They talked about insomnia, about bad cafeteria coffee, about books they had started and never finished. It became a pattern. Over the next few weeks, they kept running into each other, or maybe not accidentally, she started to wonder. But she never asked. Sometimes they would meet at the hospital cafeteria late at night. Sometimes he would send a driver to take her to a quiet spot where he was already waiting with hot chocolate or a bag of her favorite chips, he had asked once, casually and remembered. They never labeled what they were doing, they never held hands, but it felt like something more real than anything she had known before. They were not dating. They were two people figuring out how to be alive again. One night, as they sat side by side on the steps of the Metropolitan Museum, sharing a silence filled with unspoken thoughts, she looked over at him and said, "You're different from what people say about you." He turned to her, his voice low. "So are you," she smiled. "What do they say about me?" "That you are too kind for your own good." She shrugged. "It is not kindness, it is just humanity." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then maybe I am trying to remember mine." She did not respond. She just leaned back and looked up at the stars peeking through the New York haze. And for the first time in a long while, the night felt gentle. Alexander Reed had always been a man who preferred silence. It was where he felt most in control, most himself. Success had come early, too early perhaps. By the age of 30, he had already built and sold his first tech firm, then turned to finance, where his ruthless precision earned him the kind of reputation that made people either envy him or avoid him entirely. But money had never filled the silence in his life. It only padded the walls. He was 12 when his mother died. Cancer, swift and merciless. She had been a nurse at a small community hospital, the kind who stayed late with dying patients, who brought blankets to the homeless, who kissed her son goodnight even when she could barely stand from exhaustion. His father, a cold and distant man obsessed with business, had not known what to do with a grieving child, so he sent Alexander to boarding school and buried himself in quarterly reports. Alexander had learned not to need anyone, not to expect warmth, not to hope for gentleness. By 25, he had millions. By 30, billions. but none of it made the memory of his mother fade. In his private office, hidden behind walls of glass and polished walnut, there was a single photograph that he never moved. A faded picture of her in her nurse's uniform, smiling at the camera as if nothing could ever go wrong. Lily's uniform had been nearly identical. It was the first thing that struck him about her, even before her trembling hands or stubborn voice. He never told Lily. Instead, he began to do what he did best: operate in silence. Through discreet legal channels, he tracked down her remaining student loans and paid them in full. He created a health scholarship under her name at the nursing school she had once attended. No announcements, no credit. He noticed her hospital had been struggling to keep its low-income care program alive, especially during the cold months. A quiet donation arrived, anonymously of course, enough to keep it going for the next 3 years. He was careful. He never let her see the threads he was pulling behind the curtain. To Lily, he remained just Alexander, strange, quiet, generous in small ways but never ostentatious. She had no idea how closely he followed her world, how often he rerouted his own meetings just to sit in the back of a conference she might attend, or how he once waited in his car for hours outside her hospital during a blizzard just to make sure she made it to the night shift safely. He told himself it was not about control. It was about making sure she had the freedom to keep doing what she loved. He had seen what burnout did to people like her. He had seen it in his mother's eyes near the end. He would not let Lily carry that same weight, at least not alone. Some nights, after one of their quiet, unstructured meetings, he would come home and walk into his office, staring at the photo of his mother. He would think of the way Lily smiled at her patients, of how fiercely she protected people who had nothing. "You would have liked her," he once murmured aloud to the picture. "You were the same," but he never said those words to Lily. Not yet. He was still learning how to open the door to that part of himself, the part buried long ago when a small boy in a black suit stood beside a casket and stopped believing the world could be soft. Lily was changing that. With every unguarded laugh, every late-night story over takeout containers and mismatched mugs of tea, she chipped away at the armor he had worn for decades. But she did not know what he was doing for her in the shadows. He did not do it for gratitude. He did it because something about her made the silence inside him feel less endless. And for a man like Alexander Reed, that was everything. The hospital hallway smelled of antiseptic and overused coffee. Nurses moved briskly from room to room. Doctors barked orders into phones, and the overhead lights buzzed faintly like a tired heart refusing to stop. In room 412, a figure lay motionless on the narrow hospital bed, her skin pale, her breathing slow, her blonde hair strewn across the pillow, like spilled sunlight dulled by exhaustion. Lily had collapsed mid-shift, right in the hallway between 2 patient rooms. She had not eaten in 12 hours, had worked a double shift, and was halfway through another when her knees buckled and her vision turned black. By the time someone caught her, she was already unconscious. There was no next of kin listed in her file, but someone still showed up. Alexander's black car pulled into the hospital lot within 30 minutes of the call. No hesitation, no delay. When he entered the building, the staff looked up, not because they recognized him, but because of the force of presence that came with him. A man who rarely stepped into places like this unless lives or companies were at stake. He reached her room, opened the door, and stopped. She looked small, too small. Her IV line hung silently beside the bed, fluids dripping into her arm like whispered apologies for what her body had endured. Her chest rose and fell with labored rhythm. He walked in slowly, his steps heavy, and sat beside her. For a long moment, he did nothing, just watched her. Then he reached out and gently took her hand. It was cold. He pressed it between both of his, the way he remembered his mother doing when he had fevers as a child. He closed his eyes. When Lily stirred 2 hours later, it was to the feeling of warmth wrapped around her hand. Her eyelids fluttered open, and the first thing she saw was him, Alexander, sitting there, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, hair a little messy like he had run his hand through it one too many times. "What?" she whispered. "You passed out," he said, his voice tight. "You're severely dehydrated and underfed." She blinked slowly. "Oh, that is all you have to say?" His voice cracked, and when she turned to look at him fully, his eyes were storm-dark. She tried to sit up, wincing. "It's not a big deal. I just pushed myself a little too hard." "A little," he snapped, standing abruptly. "You work 2 jobs. You skip meals. You barely sleep. You think that is nothing?" She winced again, not from pain, but from the sharpness in his tone. "Alexander!" "No," he said, pacing now, his hands clenched at his sides. "You should have told me. I would have helped. I didn't want help," she said sharply, and the air between them stilled. He turned to her slowly. Lily's eyes welled with tears, her voice trembling. "I've always taken care of myself. Since I was 16. No one ever shows up, no one stays, and I didn't want to owe you anything. I didn't want you to look at me like I was broken." He moved toward her slowly. She wiped her face, ashamed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to fall apart like this." "You're not falling apart," he said gently. "You've been holding the world together with your bare hands." She met his gaze, raw and exposed. He sat beside her again, more slowly this time, and took her hand back into his, but now he held it tightly. "Not anymore," he said softly, the anger gone, replaced by something deeper. "From now on, you're mine to take care of." She stared at him, stunned. He did not say it like a man claiming ownership. He said it like a man making a promise, a vow. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she did not pull her hand away. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, Lily felt what it was like to be seen, to be cared for. Not because she asked, not because she earned it, but simply because someone refused to let her suffer alone. The move happened without a conversation. There was no official moment, no proposal, no labeled boxes or signed agreements. One evening, Alexander had offered to drive Lily to her apartment, and she had simply said, "I don't really live there anymore, do I?" He had nodded once, and from that moment, her things began quietly appearing in his space. They never spoke of it. They just adjusted. Her scrubs were folded next to his suits in the closet. Her toothbrush leaned beside his in the bathroom. He cleared a drawer in the kitchen for her tea and left a fuzzy blanket draped on the couch because she always ran cold. Still, there were no whispered "I love yous," no candlelit dinners, no arms pulling her close in sleep. At night, he took the sofa. At first she thought it was chivalry, then maybe discomfort. Then she realized he was afraid of something he could not name. He was learning how to be close, but learning slowly. Alexander showed affection in unspoken gestures. Each time Lily worked a night shift, a warm container of her favorite food would be waiting in the staff fridge, with a note taped to it. "Eat, please." Her photo, a candid shot he had taken while she laughed in Central Park, sat framed on his desk in the office where no one else ever entered. When she once forgot her coat at home, a courier appeared at her hospital with a brand new one, tailored, elegant, and far too expensive. He never said, "I miss you," but he started canceling meetings just to walk her to work. She knew he cared, but she did not know if he knew what that meant. Because there was still a wall, a quiet, soft wall she could not climb. He never said how he felt, never reached for her hand in public, never once asked her to stay the night in his bed. Not because he did not want her, but because perhaps he did not know how to need anyone out loud. And slowly, that silence began to wear on her. One evening, Lily returned from a shift to find the apartment quiet as usual. The lights were dim, a fire flickered on the hearth. Her favorite book rested on the armrest of the couch, just as she'd left it. But he was not there. She found him in his office, staring out the window. The photo of his mother beside him, her own photo just inches away. She stepped inside, her voice gentle. "You always look at that photo when something's wrong." He didn't turn. "It helps me remember." "Remember what?" His silence was long. "That people like her, and like you, still exist." She swallowed hard. "Alexander," she whispered, What are we doing?" He finally looked at her. "What do you mean?" "This," she gestured between them. "We live together. We talk. We share meals. But we don't touch. We don't say things. I don't even know if you want me here." "I want you here," he said too quickly. "Then why does it feel like I'm a guest in your life?" Her voice cracked. "Why won't you let me in?" He looked down, jaw tight. "Because once I let people in, they leave." "I'm not people," she said. "I'm me." "I know." His voice was low. "That's what makes it harder." She stared at him for a long time, then said softly, "I love you, Alexander. I think I have for a while." He looked at her, eyes wide, but he said nothing. The silence stretched too long, and that was when she knew. She nodded slowly, with a sad smile. "That's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to say it, but I can't keep waiting for a man who can't decide if he's allowed to feel." She turned and walked out of the office. That night she packed her things. He did not stop her. He stood in the hallway, one hand on the doorframe, his lips parted, his whole body taut as if fighting something ancient and hard. But he said nothing. When the door clicked shut behind her, the silence in the apartment changed. It was no longer soft, it was shattering. The silence she left behind was deafening. For days Alexander moved through his penthouse as if sleepwalking. The fire in the hearth burned low. Her blanket remained on the couch, untouched. Her teacup still sat in the sink. Her scent lingered on his coat, and he found himself standing in doorways, looking for her without meaning to. Meetings passed without his focus. Investors called and were ignored. A multi-million-dollar merger was postponed, something he had never done in 15 years of business. His assistant knocked gently on his office door one afternoon. "Mr. Reed, the Tokyo board is waiting for your confirmation." He stared at the photo on his desk, the one of Lily, the one he could not bring himself to move. "Cancel it," he said. The assistant blinked. "Sir?" "I said cancel it." Then he stood, grabbed his coat, and left the building without another word. He needed to find her. It was late when he arrived at the hospital. Snow had begun to fall again, light but steady. The city buzzed around him as he walked through the sliding doors, the air inside sterile and bright, so unlike the warmth she used to bring to it. At the front desk, he asked for her. The nurse glanced at the screen, then frowned. "Lily Bennett, she transferred 2 weeks ago." His heart dropped. "Transferred?" "Yes," the nurse said, politely distracted. "She's no longer with this facility. She didn't leave a forwarding address." He stood there for a long moment, stunned. The lobby was full of patients, doctors rushing by, the beeping of machines, but he heard none of it. "She didn't even say goodbye," he murmured. The nurse looked up, sympathetic. "Are you family?" He paused. "No," he said quietly. "I guess not." He stepped outside, the cold air biting at his skin. Snowflakes fell onto his coat and melted without trace. He walked out into the hospital courtyard and stopped at the center, surrounded by silent benches and bare trees. His chest tightened. He turned his face to the sky, eyes filling before he could stop them. "She was the only thing," he whispered, voice cracking, "that made me human." And the snow kept falling. Winter returned to New York with a hush of falling snow and a softness that made the city feel gentler. It had been a year since Lily left, a year since she walked away from the man who had not yet learned how to love out loud. Now she was different, stronger, more certain. As head nurse at a small hospital in upstate New York, she was respected and relied upon. Yet, on quiet nights, with tea in her hands, she still thought of him, still wondered if he had searched for her, still felt the echo of the words he never said. Then came the call. Her aunt had suffered a mild stroke, and Lily returned to the city to care for her. She moved into a small rental near the Upper East Side, telling herself it was temporary. One snowy morning, she wandered familiar streets and instinctively stepped into a small flower shop she once loved, the same one where, long ago, she'd seen Alexander choosing flowers for a child. The bell chimed. There he was. His back to her, tall and still, lifting a stem of white tulips from a display. She froze. He turned. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world held its breath. Alexander looked older, wiser, softer, but still entirely him. He placed the flowers down gently and stepped toward her. Close, but not too close. "You're coming with me," he said, his voice low. The words echoed from a year ago, but now they carried something raw, something real. He paused, eyes steady. "If you still want to." I never stopped waiting. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. She nodded, unable to speak. He took her hand with care and quiet awe, as if afraid it might vanish. But when their fingers locked, it was with the certainty of someone who had learned what it meant to lose, and who would never risk it again. He brought her home, not to a penthouse, but to a warm apartment on the edge of Central Park, a space filled with plants, soft light, and little details that whispered her name, her blanket, her photo. Her presence, always kept close. "You kept everything," she whispered. "I kept you," he said. 6 months later. They married on a soft summer morning in the garden of Alexander's restored family home. Laughter lined the aisle. Laughter filled the air. Guests were few but dear. Colleagues, old patients, friends who had seen their story unfold. Among them sat the elderly man Lily once cared for during a hospital fundraiser, the very moment Alexander had truly seen her. He rose to speak during the ceremony. "She's always been an angel," he said through tears. "Now she's found her guardian." Alexander spoke his vows without notes. "I didn't know how to love before you," he said, "but I promise, every day I'll learn. With you." Lily touched his cheek, her voice soft. "We'll learn together." That night, long after the last guest had gone and candles flickered low, they sat wrapped in a blanket on the porch of their new home, the hush of a summer storm in the distance. Lily leaned into him, smiling. "I never thought a freezing night at a bus stop would bring me home." Alexander kissed her hair, his voice a whisper against the wind. "That night," he said, "I didn't save you." He turned her face gently toward his. "You saved me." And that was the story of a freezing night, a silent man, and the woman who taught him how to love. Sometimes, the people who save us don't arrive with grand gestures. They come wrapped in quiet kindness, late-night ramen, and a hand held in silence. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that love can begin in the unlikeliest of moments, please don't forget to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe.